Shane, it's great to see you again.
Absolutely. It's good to have you down our way here. You like these balloons and things? We're in the community center that we started in here 15 years ago, so it's fun to have you here.
I do like the balloons. It's a nice atmosphere. Maybe it's partly the people's Easter celebration. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's,
every day's Easter.
Kind of about that time of year. This is actually Earth Day, I guess. Well, I'd like to talk with you about building peace. It's language that On Earth Peace, the Church of the Brethren, uses, and their Living Peace Church program is doing visions and dreams of building peace. So, got a whole string of questions, but we'll talk about sort of what we want to, I think. But I guess I'll start with this early question. What are some ways of building peace that are most appealing to you?
Well, boy, it sure seems like talking to brethren about peace is like me trying to give a lecture to Halliburton about oil. But I think I've been a learner of the great tradition of peacemaking, and I think there's all kinds of facets of it. There's a piece that there's a part of it that right here is hyper local. It's trying to build a neighborhood that we're proud of, where we don't hear gunshots and see kids die on the street. And so we've been doing that for 15 years, and a part of that is also asking some of the systemic questions. I think there's an interpersonal side, like alternatives to violence projects and, AVP, some of those workshops on conflict resolution. But then there's a big side, too, of asking where are the kids getting their guns, and why is our country suffering from 10,000 homicides a year, and almost one a day in Philadelphia. So
why is that?
Well, I think that there's one of the kids said it real well. He saw the gun shop. He had just moved here from California. He goes, "Why are there so many gun shops when there aren't that many deer?" But I think it's a great question. But part of it is realizing that, there's a whole, straw market for gun sales in the neighborhood, things like that. But I think that what has happened is a movement of folks heeding God's call, of all different backgrounds and faith traditions working together to try to end the gun violence. So prayer vigils outside of the gun shops and sit-ins, and demonstrations and vigils and conversations, with gun shop owners and things like that. And what's been amazing is we've seen one of the most notorious gun shops in Philadelphia closed down, Colosimo's.
I heard about
It's a bicycle shop now.
Well, that's pretty good.
The gun shop around the corner here, the shooter shop, is now up for sale. And so I think part of what peacemaking is about is imagination. It's about being able to envision a world that's different from the world that we have right now. And as a friend of mine says, faith is believing despite the evidence and watching the evidence change. So we begin to enact that kind of world that we believe in. And the more people that start doing that, the more we see it come to flourish, So then there's a side of peacemaking that is the more global side, where Dr. King said so well, I've told the kids in the ghettos that violence won't solve their problems, but then they asked me, why does our government use massive doses of violence to try to bring the change that it wants to see in the world? And Dr. King said, I knew that I could no longer speak against the violence of the ghettos without also speaking against the violence of my government. And so when we look at the world that we live in and where our kids are learning violence, sometimes it's from video games and sometimes it's from presidents, and secretaries of state and things like that, that are reinforcing this idea that violence can bring change.
I've been watching that for years, and to me it has seemed like we're a country that thinks it can have and promote violence on the wholesale level and prevent it on the retail. Mm-hmm. And I think if you practice violence wholesale, it's going to pop up retail.
Sure. Well, so there's an industry of it, where we've seen like over 150 countries have arms contracts with U.S. Corporations. We've seen, it's kind of like if I were selling guns to all the kids in the neighborhood and going, now don't shoot us, or don't shoot each other, whatever. It doesn't hold much water. So, and in the U.S., I think we're coming from the belly of the beast, where we have, the country that spends more than the next dozen countries or more combined. $20,000 a second on military.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Our 30 of our schools are going bankrupt in our neighborhood alone. So I think those are the deeper sides, where Dr. King also said a country that spends more money on military defense is approaching a spiritual death. But I think that talking of peace comes with responsibility, because the military flyers in our neighborhood, and they give out flyers that say, everybody told you to go to college, but they didn't tell you how. Join the Navy.
Oh my.
And so I think, for every congregation that considers itself a peace church, we also have a responsibility to maybe create an alternatives to military scholarship fund, to create the different futures that the military is promising. Now, whether they come through on that or not, I'm sure another thing, but I think that they are promising something. And in some ways, they are giving an opportunity to get out of some situations that are financially constraining. So one of the kids that I've walked with, he said, we don't have a draft in America, but we have a financial draft.
Yeah.
There's a lot of kids that don't know how else they're going to have a future but through the military.
Right.
So I think that's a really something worth really thinking and talking about, because otherwise all of our talk of peace doesn't really ever land on the ground.
It's true. If the peace churches gave as much to scholarships for youth as they pay in taxes every year, April 15 just passed. Half of that or more of every tax dollar is going to cost of past and present wars. And so we really do need to find ways to redirect funds. Yeah,
and I'm trying to walk the walk I'm talking with or drink the Kool-Aid I'm trying to sell, which is here, one of the things I'm proudest of at the Simple Way is that we have a Simple Way scholar every year. So a kid that we recognize from the neighborhood that is offered a full tuition scholarship to Eastern University.
Great.
And I'm really proud of Eastern for that partnership. But it was exactly the kind of stuff that we're talking about that led to that. And so I think there's all kinds of other sides to that we have to personalize violence too, to where folks can see people that our news is only telling us this is an enemy or something. So. Yeah. From going on trips to Iraq and Afghanistan, I've had a chance to do that, and Christian peacemaker teams, all kinds of great work. But there's a really great project that just yesterday I was on the Skype with kids in Kabul, the Afghan peace volunteers, right? And their website is Our Journey to Smile. And they host these global days of listening, they call it, where, on the internet, they'll be on the phone for 3 hours or 5 hours, and folks around the world can call in. So we've done a Skype call right here on the block with kids on my block, with kids in Afghanistan, and it was magical. Because the kids here are listening to these kids on the other side of the world in the middle of, the drone bombings and the conflict, and they're talking about their dreams of a world where they don't see their loved ones get killed. And that's exactly the same dreams we have for our block, so that you see the world shrink a little bit. And there's some things like Skype and the internet that have opportunities, I think, for building a world of borderless friends, where we see that these kids on the other side of the world aren't that different than the kids right next door.
Well, I'd like to ask you about human nature whenever you say they aren't that much different from the kids there and the kids here. And I guess it's a question in a sense about the gospel of the message of Jesus. Is that primarily a message to people that you could change and do things you never did, or you could get in touch with who you already are as God created you, and you could do things you've never done because you choose that good side, which is sort of latent there?
Yeah, that old saying, the Quakers and so many hold to is this idea that which is of God is in every one of us, and I think that's one thing that we can see really clearly in Scripture is that every human being is made in the image of God, and that whatever destroys life destroys a part of God, God's image in the world. And so what I am really stoked about right now is this movement of folks that are starting to talk broadly, not just the folks that have used the language of a consistent ethic of life, but there's folks that in the evangelical world, in the Mennonite world, in the Catholic world, and even now in the Calvinist and Reformed world that are starting to talk about a consistent ethic of life. And I think it's a beautiful thing, because that's part of where our political camps and stuff have really fallen short. And it makes a lot of sense, that God, as you read the early church, they were very explicitly against abortion, but also the death penalty and killing in the military. And so a lot of these things that we're talking about, I think if we say, we're going to make a renewed commitment to say every person is made in the image of God, and I'm going to protect life, I'm going to try to interrupt whatever is degrading and destroying that which is of God in people and in the world.
Well, that's great. My friend Bill Schur, who is actually the director now of On Earth Peace and of Living Peace Church, has this vision for getting congregations engaged in a conversation about Jesus' way of peacemaking. And I wonder what your thoughts are about what kind of engagement, activities, ministries, and studies can cause local churches to review their understanding of Jesus and kind of ask, what happened? You said that the early Christians had this consistent life ethic, and they were opposed to war. They weren't flying the Roman flag like churches are today. So what kind of activities and studies will engage churches in this change?
I think we do need a lot of good theology, because there's a lot of bad theology out there, and to study, to find real concrete ways that we can study, Walter Wink, and we can study. Ron Sider just wrote a great book, The Early Christians on Killing, and John Yoder and other folks that are. But I think part of what we've tried to do is also, like in Jesus for President, to add a few pictures and stories. And I think that's also what we need, is we don't just argue people into our different way of thinking. I think sometimes we get storied in, or our relationships change our worldview. And so there's a part of it that's about geography too. I think that geography has a lot to do with how we think about theology and sociology. And I mean, I never would have recognized racism until I saw it, maybe I could have seen it in Tennessee if I'd had a little better vision. But I think that I think that part of what grew a hyper awareness around issues of peace for me was seeing a neighborhood where we're still really hungry for peace. There still is a lot of violence. Being in Iraq and Afghanistan with peace delegations, made me think very. I think that when I read about drones, it was different to hear people talk about the buzz of them flying over their heads and how haunting it is. That you can't see them, you can only hear them, and the trauma that creates. Seeing kids in Afghanistan that tell me about an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old that were killed on a hillside while they were tending their cattle. And those are the stories that I didn't see on the news. Those are the things. So I think part of what we have is a relational disconnect too, to where we've only seen people on TV or read about them in story, and so I think we've got to create on-ramps into those friendships and those relationships. One of the ways that we can do that is through really good study, but I think also a way that we can do that is by creating subversive friendships, where I was just with a group of Muslims that in California. It's called American Muslim Voice, and what they've come around to is that we fear what we don't know, people we don't know,
right.
What's unfamiliar. And so their whole campaign has been from fear to friendship. And so they have Muslim families that are they have an open table and an open home to folks that are not Muslim, to get to know each other. And so I really think that's the kind of friendships we need,
Wow.
and it's what Jesus was doing. I think that being a Christian to me doesn't mean I got to get wishy-washy and say, all religions are one tree with many branches. Like, I think that what happened in Jesus is like the pinnacle of history, and yet that makes me a really good collaborator with folks that don't share my faith. It makes me interested in friendships with people who aren't Christian. And I think that it's embarrassing that a lot of times Christians have been the worst collaborators in the world. We've started with, if you don't agree with me, then what do we have in common? What a shame. So I think one of the biggest obstacles to Christ sometimes has been Christians who have a whole lot to say with our mouths, but we have very little to show of God's love with our lives.
Need more subversive friendships. It makes me think of Jesus' Good Samaritan story, where the story kind of ends up with this man who comes inquiring, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus has this man affirming that, the Samaritan who loved the hurting person was fulfilling God's will, but by definition, a Samaritan could not please God. It was another tribe, another religion, if you will. And Jesus drags this example out as, this is where salvation's at work.
Yeah, it's an amazing story, and it's scandalous because all the rich people pass by, or all the religious people pass by. And a friend of mine says, if the devil can't steal your soul, then he'll just keep you busy with church work. So I think maybe they were on their way to some kind of meeting or trustee meeting or worship or whatever. I don't know, but whatever it was, it's a beautiful thing. Jesus' stories where a Samaritan is moved by compassion, by the pain of someone else, and that's in the end, that's the real litmus test for our faith is how does it move us in compassion and love to the most vulnerable, beat up person on the side of the road.
Yeah.
And so I like how Joan Chittister said Jesus consistently challenges the chosen and includes the excluded.
Yeah.
So it's a beautiful
That is
thing.
beautiful, but it's sobering for the chosen. How am I supposed to think about myself in that mix? I do wonder if we shouldn't spend more time asking Christians whether we as Christians are truly living and teaching as Jesus lived and taught. I had this project going for 10 years called Every Church a Peace Church. The idea was to get churches to sort of officially declare themselves peace churches. Our slogan was, the church could turn the world toward peace if every church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. Now, I don't know what it would take, but moving in that direction, it seems to me if we need sort of one word to a modified church, I mean, there's a lot of questioning. Is church, there's all kinds of churches. Peace, shalom, irene, linked with active justice making, seems to be not a bad modifier for the word church. Living Peace Church, though, is better probably than Historic Peace Church.
Well, it is a living thing that I when you see that Jesus's metaphors for the church, they're not plural. They're a bride, a body. As one pastor said in our neighborhood, Jesus is coming back for a bride, not a harem. So so the thought that Jesus' longest prayer in Scripture is that we would be one as God is one. And yet you look, and right now we've got over 35,000 denominations. So we've got a long way to go towards that. But I think part of that unity is that we should be known by our love. And that if our love is what unites us, and if our love moves us to peace,
Right.
I mean, these are fruits of the Spirit, right? Love, joy, peace, and these are the things that God is like. So, if what we are to do as Christians is to represent, Jesus in the world by the way that we love and the way that we care for one another and for the poor and the marginalized, then I mean, I'm convinced that's what it means to be the church, is what it means to be the body of Christ, is we incarnate God's love. We make manifest God's love, or as Mother Teresa said, we leave off the fragrance of Jesus in the world. And
oh,
it's a
yes.
beautiful way of saying it.
All right. Well, what's your sense of sort of what's happening in this big thing called Christianity or churches? It seems to me there's a fair amount of dissatisfaction, which could be ferment toward change for good things. Is that happening?
It does feel like the old wheat and the weeds thing that Jesus said, they grow together and the whole garden's going crazy. So you got the good and the bad. But I think several years ago, the Barna Research Group did a study where they asked young non-Christians, what do you think of when you hear Christian? And the number one answer was anti-gay, number two was judgmental, and number three was hypocritical. The list didn't get much better. But what it showed, heartbreakingly, was that we've become more known for what we're against and what we're for, more for who we've excluded than who we've embraced. But I think over the last few years, the Barna and others have shown that that's radically shifting, and that there's a whole new generation of folks that, just like you just said, they want a Christianity that looks like Jesus again. They want a Christianity that's known for how it's proactive and not just reactive, for how a Christianity that's known by our love. And so there's a lot of really creative experiments in community and prophetic witness and groups that are, I think, doing imaginative work. Like my friend Jeremy Courtney in Iraq has a group called the Preemptive Love Coalition. And it's groups of doctors from North America and other places together with Iraqi doctors that are doing life-saving surgeries for Iraqi children.
Wow.
Their motto has been, love now and ask questions later. So the Preemptive Love Coalition, I mean, it's a lot like the work of Doctors Without Borders and other groups, but a lot of these are just distinctively, young people of faith that are pioneering really beautiful work that's inspired by folks that have been doing this for decades or centuries, right? But I think it needs some fresh expressions, and those are out there. I'm doing a book right now on the death penalty, and Pew and Barna just showed that millennial Christians, young, like after 1980, born after 1980, young Christians are overwhelmingly against the death penalty because they can't reconcile it with their faith.
Right.
That's really exciting to me because I think people are thinking, and in particular, they're not interested in the culture wars or the rhetoric of politicians. They're interested in Jesus, and they like what. How does Jesus feel, and what is Jesus? How does that affect how I think about things like the death penalty, or things like war, or things like drones? And I think overwhelmingly, young Christians are hungry for that consistent ethic of life. They're hungry for restorative justice. They're hungry for peace, for shalom. Yeah.
Right. Well, you talked about prophetic voice, and it seems to me one of the areas that's really where that is needed today is on drone warfare, that we need a voice of leadership in American churches which says that this is not a way to run the world. It's not actually solving problems of terrorism, for example. It's exacerbating them. Mm-hmm. So I hope that we hear that kind of voice raised. Well, you've talked about subversive friendships and preemptive love, and as this next generation takes their imagination and their dreams and visions into ideas like that, I think we'll see new things emerging.
Yeah, I do too. think that Dan Berrigan's right when he says it's not that we've tried the cross and it's failed, it's that we haven't tried the cross with the same courage or maybe the same imagination with which we've tried the sword. And you think of these drones and the amount of imagination that goes into that kind of killing, and you think, what if we had all of our best engineers, all of our greatest minds thinking about how we can build peace rather than continually to evolve war?
Right. Moving imagination in that direction. Well, I think we're going to wind this up soon. But you know, after you talk like this together, afterwards you usually think of one or two things you wish you would have said. So now we're going to take a moment to say, well, what should we have said about building peace that didn't come up when we had the chance to talk to the next generation, maybe some of the older generation? Let's say something about courage in relation to building peace. What have you learned about courage and, if you will, a risk toward building peace?
Well, you know, when you're young, you always hear about peer pressure as a bad thing. You know, that your peers are going to make you go drink or do, you know, stupid things, and sometimes they did. But I think, like, on the other hand, I think that peer pressure can be a really positive thing, and that community, in a sense, is positive peer pressure. It is surrounding ourselves with people who cultivate generosity and stir our imaginations. So I think at the heart of this is a sense that old people need some young people need some old people, and we need everyone's dreams and everyone's gifts together, and that the compelling patterns of our culture are so powerful that we can't just be peacemakers on our own.
Right.
I think we need to create communities where we're building the kind of environment and exercising the holy habits and disciplines that kind of, you know, make us into people of peace. So community and the idea of church congregations that are cultivating disciples and not just believers, not just belief-only Christianity, but that are really building up peacemakers is what it's about. And to me, in community, you get a courage you can't just get on your own. You know, by surrounding ourselves with people that are generous, it makes us more generous. You know, by people that take risks, they they inspire us to live with a little more courage. And so I think, you know, going on delegations with the CPT and living here in this neighborhood with incredible neighbors, a part of that is it creates that critical mass that kind of keeps us moving. So in the end, I think that's a really important part of all of this, is that what we do in community is try to surround ourselves with people that look like the kind of person we want to become, you know, and ultimately, hopefully, we move each other closer to Jesus.
It will happen, because it is happening. Well, thanks a lot, Shane. Yeah. Let's keep in touch.
Great to talk, brother. Always.
Talk again and see things move forward as we each make our contribution, large or small, as you say, in connection, in community with others.